les grands barrages, Inga, Swapiti, etc., casser les barrières commerciales qui entre les différents pays et avoir un véritable marché africain. C'est-à-dire, au fond, il serait important qu'on fasse comme la CECA, c'est-à-dire qu'on ait un ministre de l'énergie qui est chargé de toute la politique africaine et qui permettrait de développer l'énergie, un ministre des infrastructures, un ministre du commerce extérieur. Et ensuite, que nous nous respections nous-mêmes. C'est-à-dire que quand nous avons des réunions, au lieu d'avoir 10 sujets à l'ordre du jour à l'Union africaine, qu'on ait seulement 2 ou 3 qui constituent l'essentiel. Parce que cette nouvelle Afrique, elle est représentée par la jeunesse et les femmes qui sont extrêmement dynamiques. Nous avons un autre avantage, il y a l'accélération de l'histoire. Donc si nous renforçons l'éducation et que nous maîtrisons les nouvelles technologies, là où les autres ont mis 20 ans, nous mettrons peut-être 2 ans ou 3 ans. Mais cela suppose qu'il y ait un changement au niveau des dirigeants africains eux-mêmes. Tant que nous ne changeons pas nous-mêmes et que nous ne montrons pas que notre intérêt, c'est de développer les ressources nationales pour nos peuples et non plus pour avoir des comptes dans les banques extérieures. Et deuxièmement, que nous sommes décidés à créer les véritables conditions pour favoriser l'investissement extérieur et que nous voulons une coopération gagnant-gagnant, nous n'aurons pas de l'avant. Donc il faut que l'extérieur se rende compte qu'il y a une nouvelle Afrique et que cette nouvelle Afrique est différente des images qu'on présente à la télévision. Mais le plus important, ce que je dis à mes collègues, il faut que nous changions nos comportements, que nous respections l'Afrique et que nous soyons réellement au service de nos peuples. Nous sommes le grenier de l'Afrique, nous pouvons être le grenier de l'Afrique si nous le voulons. Nous pouvons, au fond, l'objectif, c'est de produire ce que nous consommons et consommer ce que nous produisons tout à l'heure, comme disait mon cher frère. Mais si nous ne changeons pas l'image de l'Afrique, si nous ne changeons pas nos comportements, si les gens pensent que nous ne nous intéressons pas au peuple, alors que nous avons la chance d'avoir un peuple jeune, 70% de la population en moins de 30 ans, donc nous avons la capacité de maîtriser rapidement les nouvelles technologies et d'avancer très vite. Moi, mon pays a connu la dictature pendant longtemps. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes décidés, étant donné nos grandes capacités minières, nous avons à faire en sorte que tous les pays se préoccupent de transformer ces matières premières au service d'abord des populations et de créer des conditions pour une coopération gagnant-gagnant, que les partenaires aussi acceptent que les richesses profitent à l'Afrique, mais que nous aussi nous leur créons les meilleures conditions pour que les investissements soient rentables. Mais le changement en Afrique dépend d'abord de nous les dirigeants africains. Nous avons beaucoup de défauts, nous sommes un peu égoïstes et nous ne voyons pas d'abord l'Afrique, nous nous battons souvent pour les postes, alors que nous devons nous concentrer sur ce qui est le véritable développement de l'Afrique, l'énergie, les infrastructures, le commerce interne et les échanges, et surtout la maîtrise des nouvelles technologies. Je ne vais pas être long, mais moi je suis là pour montrer qu'il y a une nouvelle Afrique, et cette nouvelle Afrique peut faire en sorte que l'Afrique soit le continent du XXIe siècle. C'est ça que nous devons faire, que l'Afrique, si on a été pendant longtemps en arrière, que le XXIe siècle soit le continent de l'Afrique.
Well, these are 5 very powerful statements about both the need for change and the desire for progress in Africa. I'm going to break down what's been said because there's a huge consensus into a number of issues that perhaps the audience has got questions about and is worried about. First of all, let's take infrastructure. So there are less roads in Africa now than 30 years ago. Half the roads of Asia, of Latin America. Only 10% of trade in Africa is internal to Africa, partly because of the infrastructure. Now, a lot of people in the audience would say, well, you've got to remove some of the obstacles to making it possible for people to invest in infrastructure. There are legal problems, there are problems of corruption, there are problems of dealing with a number of different countries when there are cross-border projects, there is red tape, things take too long. Everybody knows the infrastructure need, but we've got to make it easier for people to get the investment in. Now, I don't know if Donald Kaberuka, is Donald here, Kaberuka? From the African Development Bank, but he would say, I think there's about 100 billion of investment a year needed in infrastructure in Africa. Can you convince people who are potential investors that you can remove these blockages that appear to have existed in the past? Jacob, do you want to start? You've got great projects that you've announced for north-south infrastructure. Can they get off the ground if we can solve these problems?
Yes, they can certainly get off the ground. I think we have recognized the obstacles that Prime Minister is referring to. The African Union has taken a very conscious decision on the question of the infrastructure. And it has taken that decision fully aware of what is it. We, among ourselves, talk about these borders that makes it very difficult for us to move within the continent. Accompanying, therefore, the infrastructure development is also the addressing of the bottlenecks that are there between the countries, which are not necessarily of our creation, and we have realized that. And we are saying, in order for us to be able to move forward, developing the infrastructure would not be helpful if we could not use them because of the restrictions between countries. So we are fully aware of that. We are addressing those issues, that these bottlenecks should not be there because they inhibit the faster development and the movement within the continent. So these matters are dealt with, are actually being discussed in the regions.
Yep.
How do we open up the borders for a free flow of people, workers, as well as the goods? So that is being addressed simultaneously with the development of the infrastructure.
Now, before I move on, is there any question from the audience about this vital issue of infrastructure? It's very difficult to see if people have their hands up.
Raise a hand there.
Yeah, please.
My name is Ahmed Heikel. I'm the chairman of Citadel Capital. We have $10 billion invested in Africa. Recently, we have $350 million to form the railway in Kenya. That was financed through a lot of multinational institutions. The African Development Bank is one of them. But, and we have a big investment in Ethiopia. We're looking to make an additional investment in Kenya and in Tanzania. The problem that we face in many cases is the bandwidth at the top level. In Africa, you need to reach the top level, and the bandwidth that exists there is not always available. So even with $10 billion of investments in Africa now, sometimes you're not able to get the bandwidth.
Okay, I've got that point. Is there any other point before I put it back to the panel on infrastructure? Can I see? Can you see? Would you like to answer that question, Prime Minister Odinga?
Well, thank you, Gordon. First, what he did not say is that there's a history to their coming into this. That the railway was concessioned, that is the Kenya-Uganda Railway, first to a South African company, which turned out to have somehow cheated in the deal.
Right.
And the deal then went sour. So then they bought the shares from that South African company.
Right.
And came then on board. And then they started first negotiating through that South African company. We are sort of very keen to modernize the railway and make the railway work, because right now 95% of the cargo coming out of the port of Mombasa is going by road, which is actually doing quite a lot of damage to the road network. We have actually made it fairly easy. What is happening is that we're negotiating with the Ministry for Transportation, which is actually in charge of this.
Yep.
Now, I don't know which bandwidth he's talking about, because he says that does not apply to Kenya. Thank you.
I'm not going to get into the individual detail of the projects. We could be we could be here all day. Perhaps I should move the issue on. Have you a model, Prime Minister Meles, of moving, if you like, from a customs union to a common market to a single market, rather similar to the European Union, and that would open up trade within Africa, backed up by infrastructure development, and how quickly that can happen? I know you're not as keen on a single currency at the moment as you used to be, but on the common market and the single market. Is that going to move ahead with speed?
Yeah, this whole agenda of regional economic integration in the continent has been an ongoing process,
Yeah.
And it's been accelerated in the recent past. The more our economy becomes dynamic, the more it becomes diversified, the more we'll be able to trade between ourselves. The intra-Africa trade is hindered not only by infrastructure, but also by the structure of our economies.
Yes.
Our economies have been structured to service other, particularly European economies, and now Asian economies, with very little linkage between ourselves. And so the regional economic integration is an instrument of economic transformation, and in my view, it's also a result of economic transformation. We can't have meaningful economic integration without transforming our economies. And with regards to infrastructure and availability of top leaders for investors, in the short run, we have to do better of being accessible as senior leaders in government. In the long term, that is not a solution. The institutions of government will have to work efficiently so that things can move without the president or the prime minister saying so. That ultimately, that's the way forward. But as a sort of a transitional arrangement, we need to be a bit more available than we have been in the past.
One other part of infrastructure is obviously IT, the development of high technology and to get it into different parts of Africa. I think we've got Tim Berners-Lee here, who's the head of the World Wide Web Foundation, and I think should be acknowledged as the person who invented the World Wide Web. Tim, is there anything that you think could be done that could speed things up in Africa? Is Tim here? Yeah. Can you give a mic? Yeah.
Well, that's huge, but obviously, so the World Wide Web Foundation would love to see the other 80% of people who don't use the web at the moment using the web. There are a huge number of ways in which it helps, and I think it's not just a question of getting connectivity, of getting a fiber, getting a wire in. It's a question of getting people really using it in their own language, not just reading things, but writing things as well, so that the cultures of all the different languages are preserved, and so that people across the world who of that culture who's left can connect back. Obviously, it should be a huge economic benefit. It should be able to help education. It should be able to help health. And also it should be able to help your governments be more transparent as you put government data onto the web, as Gordon Brown made a huge project to do in the UK. So the Web Foundation will be very interested in working with you to see what are the most important things to push now to try and to get the greatest change as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. President Kikwete, IT, technology and education, but also there's still, 35 million to 40 million children not at school at all in Africa. And obviously there's only 6% of young people in vocational further education. How quickly can you move education forward, do you think?
Well, of course maybe before I take up that one, let me say few things about infrastructure. We should not come out of this meeting with an impression that there isn't much being invested in infrastructure because of some of the problems on our side. Take the telecommunications, for example. There is so much that is being invested in the mobile phone. Now, I think Africa is now the fastest growing market
yes.
in the mobile phone technology. It is our countries. It is the same leaders. There are some infrastructure aspects which do not attract private sector investment. And one of these is roads. Because for a private investor to invest in a road,